Today's AskReddit post. For those of you that escaped cults, what was your "I need to get the fuck out" story? Oh boy, this is gonna be a good one. Let's get started. Not me. My mother. She used to go to a church college up in New Jersey. Not gonna name any names here, but a cult nonetheless. No music, aside from Christian radio. Strict dress codes, etc. She knew they were bad, but she realized she needed to get fo when the preacher went up to the podium and mentioned offhand that while wrong, Jim Jones had a good point. This was in the 80s, mind you. Right after Johnstown, churches fused with colleges are ducking death traps for college freshmen. Can you explain what you mean? I've never heard of this church fused with a college thing before. I assume you're not just talking about Christian schools like Notre Dame. But I can't picture what it would even look like, and how. Specifically, are they death traps? Money pits? Cults? Went to a church that had a night where a faith healer came to visit. He healed a teenager of very severe asthma. As a sign of his faith, the teenager goes out on the bike trails without his inhaler the next day and almost dies. The pastor visits the family in the hospital and tells the heartbroken parents it was because they didn't have enough faith. And with that, I exit stage right. I say that because that's when I realized the whole thing was an effing show. Former Jehovah's Witness. The way they treat people who aren't in the religion and also how they treat people who do get excommunicated reminds me of a life hack. If a Jehovah's Witness comes to your door, say you've been excommunicated, and see how fast they are there. I am an excommunicated JW. That means I was never baptized, so they were allowed to preach to me still, and my parents would send them to my door constantly. I told my husband at the time that if they came to the door to tell them we were disfellowshipped and they would go away. So the next time they stopped by, I sent him to the door. But in his confusion and misunderstanding, he told them we were dismembered and can't talk right now. I had hoped by the look on their faces that would keep them away, but they are persistent buggers. It's a funny memory though. I am a former Jehovah's Witness. It was a lot of things, but a big one was that I never felt like I could do enough. It was constant, never-ending guilt. I used to think there was a problem with me, but I finally realized that no matter how much I did, I would still feel like I wasn't doing enough and that this wasn't an accident. They wanted you to feel guilty and inadequate. I reached a breaking point and knew I had to get out for my own well-being. Now I know more about cults and realize that this is a cornerstone of cult manipulation. My morning runs take me through a local park, and at one of the entrances to the park, teenage Jehovah's Witnesses often sit with a big sign handing out brochures. The sign, literally, says, "Will this suffering ever end?" Seeing the two miserable kids sitting next to it, I gotta hope so. Former Mormon. And when I was about 13 and couldn't get any satisfying explanation as to why women couldn't hold the priesthood, i.e. have any position in the church above a Sunday school teacher, everything we learned and did revolved around becoming a good housewife. I was in what you could consider a cult as a child. What finally fully woke me up was the pastor's trial and conviction of multiple cases of intercausal harassment and assault. We, the congregation, were told we needed to lift Pastor up because this was a test from God and he needed our prayer. Everything finally clicked for me. All the terrible things this church had been up to came crashing down and I realized my faith in this place was broken. Jehovah's Witness? No, it was actually masquerading as a Baptist church. When they changed their name, I had been sketched out for a while, but they made me alienate myself from all my friends outside the cult. So I stayed because I was worried I wouldn't have anyone. One day the pastor announced that they were changing their name and going their own way. The other church they were partnered with dropped them because their views were getting too out there. A cult church got dropped from a bigger cult church because their views were too crazy. Sitting there that night, I decided I had to go. It sucked losing so many friends, but now I'm in school and have a job I enjoy. Had I stayed with them, I'd be married to whatever guy there was closest to my age and pregnant with my third child. Oh, kind of tangential, but the breaking off from the main branch of the church reminds me of this one arc wedding called Lookism. Johan, Myra, and Zach's church broke off and became a cult where they smoked some weird drug and believed in the chosen one. I hope you're doing better now. Sounds like you got your life on track. I happen to have an exact moment. Let me start with, it was not a confirmed cult. However, I was listening to Beautiful Anonymous hosted by Chris Gethard, and a person on his podcast was a cult survivor. The more she talked, the more scared I got. I was going to meet up with some other members. I threw 2 of them in my car and made them listen. We all quickly figured out what I had realized. We decided to stick it out. We had a trip at the end of summer. During the trip we made sure we were all in the same car, and we never came back. Without listening to that podcast, I would have never in my life thought it was possible to be in a cult, or more in my case a cult-like environment, but you can. You should definitely try and call in to tell your story. I'm sure he would love to hear you tell it. Former Mormon. Ever seen the South Park episode wherein Joseph Smith translates the Book of Mormon using a hat and a rock? The entire episode is factually accurate. Mormons are historically racist and extremely intercoursist to boot. Their entire dogma reads like the insane ramblings of a hateful, exclusionary, lustful snake oil salesman. Because it is. I saw that episode years after I left the church and I was cracking the duck up the whole time about how accurate it was. When they reinstated a member of the congregation who had intercoursally assaulted a child, because he had repented and God had forgiven him, so we had to then publicly counseled my father, who didn't agree with this monster being in the same place as his 4 children. My father was stood down from his position as elder because of this. At least he stood up. When they wanted to install Covenant Eyes app on all of my devices, including my work-issued computer which contained access to multiple local celebrities' information, they flipped out when I noped the duck out. More about this Covenant Eyes app? Sounds like the ultimate overly attached girlfriend app, lol. It isn't. It's an anti-porn app to hold yourself accountable, meant for personal use. You choose a person close to you, so if you visit naughty websites, it sends your friend a list of the websites via email. So I used to live in a desert with my mother until 2 cultists came and took me to their temple. The cult I was in stole children at a very young age. Eventually they refused to promote me to a higher rank in the cult, so I joined an old guy who helped me exterminate them all by using their slave army of 10-year-olds against them. Then my mentor cut off my legs and left me to die. At first I thought this was a really obscure reference until I read the last sentence. I recommend you get yourself a cyborg suit. It'll fix you right up. I was in a similar scenario. Got cut in half. Robotic legs fixed me right back up. I was in Amway Ltd for a year and a half. I realized I needed to get out when 1. I found out about the killings of gays in Chechnya and began to suspect that I was unwittingly funding that or similar activities through my involvement in Amway due to the extreme conservatism of the environment. Out of curiosity, I later found out that one of the DeVos foundations donated to NOM, which worked toward enacting severe legal punishments for homo-intercausality in Uganda. 2. I couldn't get out of my seat while a speaker was talking and couldn't not donate $236 to hear Bilans during Sunday morning service at conference because of expectations that had been subtly drilled into my head, even while already suspecting what I mentioned in 1. And Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education. Unbelievable. Former Mormon. I became disenchanted with it when I came out. I realized I needed to formally leave when I found out that its foundations are lies from start to finish. The fact that doctrine keeps being rewritten and the dark history is frequently either explained away or denied is a pretty big part of it too. Kool-Aid Man busted through a wall and shouted, "Oh yeah, who wants a drink from this jug?" Like in a intercoursey way? How could Kool-Aid Man not be intercoursey? When I found out that all Jehovah's Witnesses elders are basically liars, combine that with that JWs insist that intercausal crime victims must have 2 witnesses to the intercourse crime before the elders will listen to them. This also includes child rape victims. Combine that with the victim is shunned by family and lifelong friends if they speak out. when they started sucking off the uncircumcised young boys and calling it a part of a ritual. I used to be in a cult called the Anti-Social Justice Warriors on Tumblr. At first it was simple. We just danced like people who overly complained about poop and trying to take down things and censoring all of the cool and fun stuff of media. Soon, when the Trump election happened, all of my anti-SJW friends were starting to get a bit weird, supporting this idiot who has no idea of how the government works and no idea how a government works. This guy was all over the place. Soon, I just started to get a bit liberal. All I wanted was not to have the crazies in media, but then I started to realize the crazies literally, while they can be wrong sometimes, it's better to be wrong sometimes than all of the time. This will get buried, but this hits home hard. My realization that I needed to get out came when I found it was easier to tell my parents that my girlfriend was pregnant rather than tell them I didn't want to go on a Mormon mission as a 17-year-old. It's been 10 years and looking back it makes no sense, but it led me to a beautiful life and I'm immensely grateful. Now I'm the father of the 2 most incredible children and I haven't looked back. Fuck the Mormon cult. Might be buried, but I read it. Rock on. After 47 years of strict adherence, I was sitting in church one day looking at Facebook on my phone. Came across an article and began reading it, jaw hitting the floor. While in church, using the church Wi-Fi as I read this expose on the same church I was sitting in, which led to 2 months of intense research that opened my eyes to the lies and hidden history of the Mormon Church. Despite how badly I wanted to avoid the awakening BC, it would mean that my entire life up until that point had been hijacked from me by a fake religion and fraudulent founder. The mounting evidence eventually overwhelmed me and I stopped believing. That was 2 years ago, and I cannot express through words how much it means to me to now have the rest of my life to be my own. Not a series of decisions that I will make under the false teachings of the Mormon Church. The most difficult part? None of my close friends or family, except for one of my 5 children, will talk to me about any of it or read any of the articles that could wake them up. Despite many of the articles being found in official church literature and sources the church accepts as true. When I divorced my abusive ex and realized that I wasn't free to have any more relationships after that if I won't maintain my relationships, my family and entire social system, friends, acquaintances, everyone I knew, all because that cult masquerading as a religion controlled practically every part of my life. You're not allowed to remarry, date or even flirt. Completely humiliating. It's the Jehovah's Witnesses. In case you can't tell, the second wake up came shortly thereafter when Australia revealed that they had a massive pedophile problem that they refused to address. To this day, they are the only religion in Australia who refuses to apologize, reform or work with the authorities on how they can change anything, when they clearly are the worst of the bunch when it comes to systemic child abuse. It is a horrible, repressive and even deadly cult. Never join them or even study with them unless you do your Google homework first. Cult may be a dramatic word for me, but I was part of an aggressive church youth group, meaning they wanted to be the biggest and best in the area. My city had a ton of churches, but my ex-church could only hear its own voice, so then would plant a church in an area with a lot of other churches and run the smaller churches out of money. Even made a smaller church change its name because it was too similar. I made excuses for years for my church and the way people acted so shallow and abuse of funds. I was 17 and wasn't willing to believe that maybe these aren't the good people I think they are. Anyway, I didn't need the I need to get out moment. I volunteered with them for a year and helped run camps, and then not one leader tried to keep in touch with me, and I even shortly later got a divorce at 20. I had so many leaders and people I looked up to, and no one ever reached out. Instead, a few kicked me out of their Bible study and removed me on social media because of some of my marital issues. I realized what it felt like to be on the other side of the white door. It broke my heart. That marriage broke my spirit. I've been putting myself back together and like myself a lot more now. Would an MLM be considered a cult? It was when my then husband decided that he could do as he wished with me, even if I was asleep. Our upline mentors had been pushing the idea that he was the leader in our home and business. He made the decisions. I awoke a few nights to something I did not approve of or ask for and finally decided to cut and run. This is putting it very simply, as I don't want to relive the details. OP, I feel like you would enjoy Joe Rogan's interviews with Leah Remini and Ron Miscavige. I love the Leah Remini podcast. And Ron has an even better story. Ron's escape was crazy. It's nuts that it's that hard to leave. I was raised in a Christian church that was borderline cult status. No music, no movies. We were told never to get close to anyone who wasn't from the church. Using a condom is a sin. And it isn't uncommon for 16 and 17-year-olds to get married before they graduate high school. And I knew I had to leave when during the sermon the preacher told the congregation that it was a sin to think too much about what they told us. Most of my family still goes to that church, so I'm kind of an outcast. People outside the church don't care to know me because I'm so much different mentally, and people from the church barely will look at me because I left it. A cult. A small unpopular religion. Religion. A large popular cult. Yes, the religion here is made of cult. When the other churchgoers started speaking in tongues during the sermons. Nope, the duck out at 14 and never looked back. I couldn't get any recruits. Not me, but my aunt is a Jehovah's Witness. I was 12 years old and was interested in gothic emo culture. After watching The Nightmare Before Christmas, she pulled me aside and told me if I didn't stop messing with the occult, I'd be raped and attacked by demons. Yeah, I'm an atheist now. I was baptized Mormon, but I was never even really an active member. I went to church sporadically, but they baptized their kids at 8 and all my friends were getting baptized and they got a pretty dress and presents. So it seemed like the normal thing to do. I don't think I ever went to church again after that because I wasn't going to get a party thrown for me again, and that was my aha moment, I guess. At 12 my mother left the church and became Wiccan, but wasn't able to get excommunicated until I was an adult. They beat around the bush and make it difficult so that they can keep up their numbers. I also got excommunicated, but there are sites nowadays that people have set up to remove your information from the church fast. I just decided one day to delete Facebook. Also grew up at JW and was in for 25 years. Once a year JWs have a 3-day convention. Basically you have to sit through various Bible lectures for 8 hours a day. JWs believe themselves to be the only true religion and everything else is false religion. So you grow up very critical of other forms of worship. For me personally, I was critical of mega churches as they seemed more like a concert and hangout than actually learning anything from the Bible. While the once a year conventions consisted of thousands of JWs in place for the weekend, it was almost business-like. Everyone sat in their seats quietly during the lectures. We had a 1-hour break for lunch and everyone would walk around and talk, and that was it. Well, in 2019 the JWs has an international convention where they had 40,000 in attendance. People who visited from other parts of the world were told wear their traditional garb. JWs came in with poster signs. They started singing and dancing during the program and cheering during any video clips played. I found myself in a 3-day mega church, the very thing I grew up criticizing. This is gonna get good. Islam and Judaism. Self-explanatory. Raised as a part of the Church of God side of Christianity, nothing really stood out to make me leave until I was about 12ish. I lived with my grandparents and my mom. My dad was in prison at the time. Now that I look back at it, the church itself was weird enough. Children's plays with holiday people who we weren't supposed to believe in. I personally played Mother Nature in one of them. The moment I realized I needed to get out and leave was the moment I realized I wasn't straight. My mother acted like she accepted me but has since proven otherwise. My grandmother still doesn't know and I don't plan on telling her. I don't know if this entirely counts, But when I was very young, my parents sent me to a school they thought was a nice place for little kids to go and learn. Turns out it wasn't, and I was force-fed Christian extremist beliefs until I was 11. I never truly believed in anything they said, so I was constantly exiled there. It was never really that fun, tbh. A major bra moment at that. I ended up swapping to a different school by forcing myself to be expelled by ruining one of their holy shrines. So at least I got out of there. Isn't this when you got introduced and dragged to an MLM scheme by your friend? They always looks like a cult trying to convert us. Ex-Mormon over here. I realize that the church is ducked at 12. TBH, that's early. From the moment you're born. It's just a bunch of religion thrown in your face. As soon as you get out of the hospital, your kid is blessed. Then till the age of 8 church teachers will say that Jesus is with you and stuff about the Holy Ghost and how to receive him. The Holy Ghost was always a he, and when I asked why not a she, I was told because men are more powerful. At 8 you're baptized and you receive the Holy Ghost, who will guide you through hardships. Spoiler, he doesn't. All he does is nothing actually. When you reach your teen years you attend spiritual activities on Wednesday. Sometimes there would be a second activity on Saturday, but that only happened twice a month. As soon as you reach high school, you have to go to church at 5/6 am for 1 hour. Not to mention that %10 of everything you earn goes to the church. Strict dress code. Having kids learn that other religions are %100 fake. Saying that mental illness will go away with prayer and whatnot. I'm proud to say that I'm not a member anymore. Duck you, Jackie, for telling me mental illness was Satan possessing me. Not really a cult, but a lot of narcissistic people who had a lot of fanboys flying monkeys around and were poop talking about everyone around their back. Basically a cult, but without ideology, I suppose. When I found out they did that about me as well, I ditched every single one of them. I wasn't in a cult, but I went to a very cultish church meeting once. I was in high school, stayed over at a friend's, and the next day went to church with his family. It was a tiny church with only about 25-30 people. The preacher opened up service by playing some music with the band. Then after a few songs he started speaking in tongues, which was really just poor Latin. Then someone in the congregation stood up and started channeling God and speaking as though he was God himself. When he was done, he pretended it was all a trance and that he was surprised to find himself standing up. It was ducking weird. There was other stuff that made it weird, but it was a long time ago, and those two things really stand out in my memory. And I'd been a churchgoer for most of my life up to that point, and no service I'd been to was ever like that. But my first and only visit to this church was apparently full of people who were regularly possessed by God. So I felt pretty confident that it was a cult. I'd always been doubtful, but when my aunt died I prayed the night before. I knew after that it was all fake. I also read sections of the book written about it, and I was shocked how much racism, homophobia and intercoursism there was in it. I really hate them, so I don't mind shaming them on here. The cult was called Christianity. I grew up in a sort of fringe Protestant religion and went to boarding school for high school. One Wednesday night they herded all of us students into the chapel where they showed us a very long documentary on the evils of music like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, etc. You know the drill. Playing everything backwards. Sacrifices to Satan, etc. I was kinda used to spiraling this tbh, since I had always loved rock music and my mom kinda programmed to me to be skeptical of the church anyways. I just remember my friend Jake sitting in front of me starting to look around at all the other students who seemed to be kind of hypnotized by the whole thing. He caught my eye and said something like, "White Wolf, what is this? Isn't this weird? This is wrong." And just for that, something we had accepted as normal behavior became the launching point for seeing everything else they did from another perspective. Just to have another person in there with me that confirmed my eye rolling and even alerted me that we actually were sitting in a Wednesday night brainwashing session. It was when the Catholic priest told me that faith and belief was the safe bet, because what if it's true? If it's not, you'll never know it anyhow. Floor gang. When my tambourine broke. Up until about age 17 I was frequently dragged to rituals in which I was surrounded by candles in a dimly lit room while robed believers chanted in dead languages and sang in a harmonious discord. Of course, there were multiple collections taken each ceremony, and the believers would empty their pockets into the collection receptacle being passed around. The head shaman guy would often have his young acolytes dip this weird scepter thing into a bucket of liquid and then liberally shower me and other attendees by flicking it toward us. At every ceremony, we learned that we are not good enough people to exist in the mortal coil, much less to correctly charter a path into the next universe at our eventual deaths. But mom took us out for ice cream afterward if we behaved ourselves, so we sat there and just waited it out each week. Slowly realizing we were all once part of cult church, call it what you will. We're scarred from it and still have to break free as a civilization from the repression and of all forms of cults, aka religion. The launch of Fallout 76 made me leave the Bethesda cult. 19 years old and I was being sucked into the Baptist faith. Went through the baptism, and when I came up out of the water, I was literally thinking, as I heard hallelujahs, this is a cult. Literally the last time I was in a church. Bro, you actually watched the whole video. I'd give you a high five if I was a human. Make sure to click the like button and subscribe for more great content. See you next time.